Congressman John Garamendi, and with me today we have men and women that are critically important to California and this nation. We're all here today with a very important message. Wildfires are destroying America's forests. They're also destroying Americans and homes and communities across this nation. Each year we're seeing more wildfires all across the nation. We're seeing fires that are more intense, fires that are more dangerous and more deadly. Many reasons for this. One of the reasons is that the United States government has not been able to get ahead of the increasing number of fires. The money that's appropriated every year for the National Park Service, the Bureau of Land Management, and for the U.S. Forest Service has proven to be insufficient. And in order to meet the ongoing need to fight fires, the current law requires that those agencies dip into operating funds, funds that are necessary for the ongoing forest health, funds that are necessary for the management of the forest, for maintenance, and for the protection of the forest. $3.2 billion that was supposed to be set aside for forest health, for maintenance, and for the ongoing health of the forest, everything from campgrounds to fire breaks, has been moved over to fight fires. We have to end the vicious cycle. The legislation 3992 does that. The proposal by the administration in this year's budget proposal does it also.
What's important to talk about is in California, we have a very integrated response system to the fires across the state. And that's very integrated between the local, state, and federal agencies. Wildland fires, like most disasters, know no boundaries. With the landscape and ownership patterns across California and the values and assets at risk, one fire, whether it starts on federal land or on private land under the responsibility of the state, will quickly burn into other jurisdictions and across property boundaries and affect all of the agencies that you see behind me. Just as important, not having a solid funding resource for the fire suppression component then impacts the other program areas such as you heard, forest health, forest management, vegetation management. We will never get ahead of these challenging fire and vegetation conditions that we're seeing that are continuing to drive these devastating fires if we take the money away from the fuels treatment projects that are the very programs that will allow us to mitigate the impacts of these large devastating fires. So maintaining a strong response mechanism that does not impact fuels treatment and other critical program areas at the federal level allow all of us in the state across all landscapes to be effective at protecting the state's natural resources and the people and the infrastructure that are present here in the state. We absolutely support a mechanism that will bring the federal funding necessary so that our federal partners have that same ability to fight the fires and continue to treat vegetation and provide active forest management.
Over the last 20 years, a combination of changing climate, increasing population in those wildland areas, as well as the densification of our forests, have really created more intense wildfires that have impacted communities, and they've impacted critical infrastructure, and they've impacted the very watersheds that produce millions of gallons of water to millions of folks in California and across the country. We're using the same business model to fund wildfires. The way that we pay to fight these growing fires is fundamentally broken. We've been forced to finance wildfire suppression activities out of normal program operations. That's forest health programs, fuel reduction programs next to communities at risk, as well as watershed programs that protect that very water that's critically important to all of California.
While some fire is natural, normal, and needed, our forests today are not in a natural state due to more than a century of misguided management practices, including the suppression of good fire. For example, the United States Department of Agriculture Forest Service estimates that nationwide about half of the forested lands that they manage are in immediate need of restoration, an area about the size of the state of Oregon. However, we know that there's something we can do about this. We know that thinning works. We have proven time and again that forest management restores the forests that support our lives and livelihoods. We can invest in science-based restoration actions, including selective thinning and controlled burning. This proactive restoration work is much safer and cheaper than fighting fires reactively and saves lives and property. In California, at least 3 million acres are in need of treatment, but fewer than 100,000 acres are being treated each year. We are not even keeping up with annual growth, and will need to expand our efforts at least fivefold to make a difference. But tragically enough, nearly every year we borrow money from forest health restoration and other proactive projects for land stewardship and recreation due to shortages in firefighter funds. We are robbing money from Peter to pay Paul. Here in California, the proportion of the Forest Service budget for suppression has skyrocketed from around 10% to 47%, almost half of their budget over the last 2 decades. While over the last few years, fuels treatment funds have plummeted by about 75%. We need to invest in safer, cheaper, ecologically based forest restoration, and the Wildfire Disaster Funding Act is an important part of that solution. So we urge Congress to act now and pass this important legislation.
As I speak, 4 fires are burning in Yosemite National Park. Earlier this year, the El Portal fire threatened Yosemite National Park, destroyed homes and wildlife habitat, endangered historic buildings and local economies. When the 4,500 acre plus fire was finally contained, the National Park Service was held holding a price tag exceeding $10 million. And when funding runs out for such expensive disasters, our National Park Service and federal land management agencies have to rob their proverbial grocery budgets to cover the costs. At our national parks, which are already significantly underfunded, that means delays for critical upkeep and repair projects, including deferred maintenance backlog that exceeds $11 billion. This puts our historic landmarks, our visitor centers, our campgrounds, well-traveled park roadways at risk and will cost taxpayers more in the long term.
8 of the worst fire seasons we have had have occurred since the year 2000. So what can we expect going forward? Regardless of what you think the causal factors are, and there are a number, the climate change, the extended droughts that occur on a year-to-year basis and overlay in California for 3 years here in a row. But regardless of how you think about the causal factors, we know that we are going to continue to face a tougher and tougher problem. We are going to see increased fire intensity. We're going to need new solutions in terms of how we respond. As I mentioned at the start, we have the relationships and the talented people to solve those problems. But it does not make sense for us to finance this effort in the way that we have.
Well, thank you all very much. Particularly thank you to all the participants here. Thank you.